All right. So I just got done watching a video on Peter McCormack's podcast. He had Gary Vee on, and they were discussing Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and blockchain, things of that nature. And Gary, who I have been following for a very long time, I'm a big fan of Gary. I love his philosophy when it comes to content creation and perspective and those type of things. So it was a very interesting listen for me to hear him on the podcast. I know a lot of people were a little bit of kind of annoyed with Gary just because they're not really used to his style. If you watch him all the time, you know he's really bad at interrupting people, but that is his style, and he usually adds a lot of value to the conversation. He usually has a lot of good things to say. And I think it's important to sort of reflect on everybody's perspective when it comes to the overall outcome of cryptocurrencies because we really don't know how nobody can predict with 100% certainty how everything's going to play out, right? Some stuff just has to play out. When it comes to new technology, nobody can predict for certain how everything's going to play out. But one of the things that I noticed that he was doing, and also I noticed a lot of people who are outside of the crypto space do when they try to understand blockchain and the impact that it's going to have on our future, because that's really what the whole podcast was about. How is this going to impact our future? And Gary kept bringing up, well, this is going to totally restructure the power of the world. And I think I can absolutely agree with that. A lot of people who really understand blockchain definitely agree with that. And he kept bringing up the point, well, how will Russia, how will China, how will the US respond to that? And I want to go ahead and try to answer that question really quickly to the best of my ability. I'll try my best to make sure this video is not too long. But basically, I'm going to just talk on the main points that you need to understand. So first off, Bitcoin is built on a blockchain, right? We know that it's a cryptocurrency, and that's usually everybody's gateway into the cryptocurrency space. They learn about Bitcoin. And so when they associate blockchain, they associate Bitcoin together. But truthfully, they're not exactly the same thing. Bitcoin is intended to be a cryptocurrency. When it was first the white paper was first written by Satoshi, it was designed to be a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency network that you could trade peer-to-peer with other people around the world with no central party in between. As the network didn't get mainstream adoption, it didn't go viral, the narrative switched from the peer-to-peer payment network, which it still technically is, but it's very slow, to Bitcoin is a store of value or digital gold. So that's pretty much where Bitcoin's at right now. But to address the underlying technology, which is the blockchain technology that makes Bitcoin possible, it really is much more multifaceted than what it's advertised as. So again, when people think of cryptocurrency, they think of currency, and 99.9% of the cryptos in this space, the underlying application is not currency. It is not trying to be the world reserve currency, the currency of the internet. It's not trying to replace the dollar. None of that, okay? The underlying application for these cryptocurrencies will vary based on what the team is trying to do, what the project is trying to accomplish. But because they all use blockchain technology, they are cryptos. That is what they all share in common. They all have blockchain tech. And because they all have blockchain tech, what does it do? It extracts the middleman. So it takes out the middleman, and now they're essentially, disintermediating all of these legacy systems that make huge amounts of money on middlemen. Things like banks, things like governments, at the highest level, governments. And that's where the conversation kept going. It kept going to governments. Well, governments won't like this. And I think it's important to understand that, especially if you want to really understand it, that government and banks, oftentimes in this space, they're kind of referred to with a negative connotation. They're sort of seen as evil, immoral. For the purpose of this conversation, I don't like to look at it that way. I don't see it that way. They're simply tools, just like money is a tool. And their legacy systems, their legacy technology. That is what government is. And if you look at it like that, I think it makes a lot more sense as to how blockchain technology completely dominates and takes over. And I think it's going to happen a lot faster than people are expecting. So if you think about it, government as a technology is pretty much the service provider for society. If you look at every advanced nation in the world, and even the growing economies and industries of the world, what do they all share in common? They all have a government. Because if you don't have a government, it pretty much means you have no society, you have no laws, you have no rules. There's no playbook that people can follow in order to cooperate and work together and build commerce, et cetera, et cetera. So governments are the service providers of society. That is pretty much their function as tech. Now, I know there's a lot of things that come along with governments that we all across the political spectrum find frustrating, like bureaucracy and corruption. Those type of things come with government, but it's not really the core function of government. It's like comparing, because let's say cars, cars are an innovation that allows us to travel from point A to point B much faster, and it allows us to expand our working opportunities, our business opportunities, and grow our economies. On the downside, cars release a lot of carbon and they're bad for the environment when everybody's driving at one time. So you wouldn't say that, okay, well, cars are all bad or all good. It's just a tool. It has good and it has bad, and it's legacy tech. Eventually, they will have motors that are completely electric. They already do, and that will become the standard. And that is just how tech naturally just progresses. The inefficiencies become better, and so on and so on. Now, when it comes to government as a service provider, I think the question that we should be asking is, what does government do today that cannot be replaced by either Web 2 or Web 3? Now, Web 3 is pretty much just the internet at scale mixed with blockchain and AI. That is pretty much Web 3. It is has the rails to transact value peer to peer online through applications, not just information. So when you think of Web 3, that's what people are referring to. So things that we need the government for today, right? Just to name a few, we need them to store deeds for land and property. That's very important for investment. That's very important in just society. People need to own things. People need to transact. A government database is where that stuff is hosted. Now, with public blockchains, we don't need that government service anymore. So you can take that off the list. And then you have things like elections, right? If you want to live in the most free society possible, you usually want to have a democratically elected system, a system where everybody who contributes, who pays taxes, gets a vote. And you want that to be transparent, free, fair. That is an issue in a lot of countries around the globe. We've seen that in the past. And this past election, we saw that as a big issue. A lot of people did not trust the election process. 70 million people didn't trust the election process. And then, even on top of that, when it went to the Supreme Court, they didn't trust the Supreme Court. So, without getting over politically involved, what I'm saying is these systems, what that tells me is people are losing complete trust in the media, people are losing complete trust in the government, people are losing complete trust in these legacy systems. And that is largely due to the role of internet at scale, which Gary would actually know a lot about this because he is a content creator. What the internet at scale pretty much allows us to do as a globe, as a people, is to form communities across borders. So if you're into something that is niche, like for example, I like cryptocurrencies, I can be part of a community online that also likes cryptocurrencies because the internet pretty much facilitates that. So, even if there's nobody in my local community that shares the same interests as me, I can always connect with someone who does. So the internet pretty much goes completely against what our status quo has been as far as having national societies where we all are ruled by a constitution and a set of rules, and that is enforced by the governments. Truthfully, that is the reason why I believe our society is crumbling. It is because the internet at scale is allowing people to sort of build identities that exist outside of the plantation, so to speak, the nation. where you're from, where you're born. It doesn't matter as much anymore. You can start a business and you can market to people across the world. You can communicate with people across the world. And that is information. That is what a global information network at scale accomplishes. Now, when we talk about Web3, moving on from Web2, now you're talking about a global network of value that is all connected and is going every single way, right? So it's one of these situations where it's going to slowly but surely take away everything that the governments of the world have done. So that is essentially how I see this situation playing out. Gary mentions, well, what about Russia, China, and the US? What about them? In my opinion, it's getting to the point where people are continuing to slowly, well, actually at this point more rapidly turn away trust from these systems that do require trust, because we can't see what's going on behind the curtain. We have to use our deductive reasoning, our sense, but everybody comes from a different perspective and view, so everybody's not going to see things the same way. And what blockchain is a truth. It is a consensus based, math based truth that can be more easily accepted by the masses and can allow us to cooperate with each other without so much friction, without knowing, because so many people do not know what is true and what is not true. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here. That's pretty much my take on it. I mean, you can think about every single service that the government provides as a service provider to society, and just start thinking of them as a thought exercise. Just think of all the things that the government does realistically. And all of those things can be replaced. You don't need the government to tax. You can build programmable currency that taxes itself. You don't need the government, for the deeds. You don't need the public. You don't need the government database. You don't need the law system. You can have code that can function as law. And eventually, it's going to get to the point where you have these overpaid bureaucrats, and we're going to ask ourselves, why are they making so much money, and what exactly are they doing? Well, they're not doing much of anything because our society is becoming self-sovereignable. We can create our own governance structures, and because they'll be made of code, they'll be much more fluid and flexible. So if something's not working, we change it, we amend it. If we like the way other countries or other towns or other cities are doing things, we either adopt it, fork into it, update the software, change to a governance system much more like them. Or if we can't do that because the people of that society just don't want to do that, you just move. You go move to that society. It's going to be a much more free era to live in that sense, because there will be a lot more choices. You're going to have a trusted identity that goes with you, a trusted birth certificate, a record that can all be verifiable, and it's all communicating trustlessly together without the need of a government that you could potentially piss off and become censored or get thrown in jail or whatever the case may be. All your identity will come with you. If you are a criminal, that will be known. You'll be able to be, spotted, that type of thing. So it's going to allow us to move a lot more freely. And I think governments of the world, since they are comprised of people at the end of the day, are going to welcome that sort of change. Maybe I'm naive. I think if you were to pitch that today, of course, Russia, China, the US are not going for it because the path is not clear yet. But 10 years down the line, once you start to see these industries, these legacy systems get replaced, and everything becomes a lot more clear, how we progress, how we move forward, how we function, how we self-sovereign, then I think as a globe of people, we will all be on the same page and be ready to opt into this new decentralized environment.